It was a cold, foggy evening in London when Detective Arthur Collins received an urgent message. The note, delivered by a young boy, simply read, "Come to 12 Baker Street at once." A matter of life and death. Collins adjusted his hat, grabbed his coat, and stepped out into the dimly lit streets. Baker Street was quiet, save for the occasional clatter of a horse-drawn carriage. Number 12 was an old, crumbling townhouse with peeling paint and a creaky gate. Collins knocked twice, and the door was opened by a nervous-looking maid. "Detective Collins," she whispered. "Thank goodness you're here. Please, follow me." She led him to a dimly lit study where a man lay slumped over his desk. His face was pale, and a single gunshot wound marked his chest. The room was in disarray, papers scattered, drawers pulled open, and a shattered vase on the floor. "Who is he?" Collins asked, examining the body. "Mr. Edward Whittaker," the maid replied, her voice trembling. "He was a wealthy businessman. He received a strange letter this morning, and he's been on edge ever since." Then this happened. Collins noticed a crumpled piece of paper in Whittaker's hand. He carefully unfolded it and read the words aloud. "The third man knows the truth. Beware." "The third man?" Collins muttered. "What does that mean?" The maid shook her head. "I don't know, sir. But Mr. Whittaker kept saying he's here. He's watching." Collins began to search the room for clues. He found a ledger hidden in a secret compartment of the desk. It contained detailed records of large sums of money being transferred to an unknown account. The last entry was dated just 2 days ago. As Collins flipped through the ledger, he noticed a name scribbled in the margins: Victor Lane. "Who is Victor Lane?" he asked the maid. She hesitated. "He was Mr. Whittaker's business partner, but they had a falling out a few months ago. Mr. Lane accused Mr. Whittaker of stealing from him." Collins's mind raced. Was Victor Lane the third man mentioned in the note? Or was there someone else involved? The detective decided to visit Victor Lane's residence. Lane lived in a modest apartment on the other side of town. When Collins arrived, he found the door slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was empty, but signs of a struggle were evident: overturned furniture, broken glass, and a trail of blood leading to the window. Collins followed the trail and found a blood-stained handkerchief on the windowsill. It bore the initials V. Just as Collins was about to leave, he heard a faint groan coming from the closet. He opened it to find Victor Lane, barely conscious and bleeding from a head wound. "Mr. Lane, can you hear me?" Collins asked, kneeling beside him. Lane's eyes fluttered open. "Collins, you have to stop him. The third man. He's real." "Who is the third man?" Collins pressed, but Lane's eyes closed and he fell unconscious. Collins called for an ambulance and stayed with Lane until help arrived. As he waited, he noticed a small, crumpled photograph on the floor. It showed 3 men standing together: Edward Whittaker, Victor Lane, and a third man whose face was blurred. The detective's heart raced. The third man was real, and he was the key to solving this mystery. Collins returned to Whittaker's townhouse to continue his investigation. He questioned the maid again, and this time she remembered something important. "Mr. Whittaker received a visitor yesterday," she said. "A tall man in a black coat. He didn't give his name, but Mr. Whittaker seemed terrified of him." "Did you see his face?" Collins asked. "No." He kept his hat low and his collar up. "But he left something behind." The maid handed Collins a small, silver pocket watch. Engraved on the back were the words, "To James, with love." Collins examined the watch closely. Inside, he found a tiny photograph of a woman and a child. On the back of the photo was written, "Forever yours, Eleanor." The detective's next stop was the local records office. He searched for any mention of a James or Eleanor connected to Whitaker or Lane. After hours of digging, he found a marriage certificate for James Harper and Eleanor Whitaker, Edward Whitaker's sister. James Harper had disappeared 5 years ago, leaving behind his wife and child. According to the records, he was presumed dead. But Collins had a hunch that James Harper was very much alive, and he was the third man. Collins tracked down Eleanor Harper, who now lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of London. She was hesitant to speak at first, but Collins's persistence paid off. "James didn't die," she confessed. "He faked his death to escape Edward. My brother was a cruel man. He ruined James's business and drove him to despair. James swore he'd get revenge." "Where is he now?" Collins asked. Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know. He said he had to finish what he started." Collins returned to the city, determined to find James Harper. His search led him to an abandoned warehouse by the river. Inside, he found Harper waiting for him. "It's over, James," Collins said. "I know what Edward did to you, but this isn't the way." Harper laughed bitterly. "Edward got what he deserved. Victor too. They thought they could destroy me and get away with it. But I'm not the man I used to be." Collins tried to reason with him, but Harper was beyond redemption. In the end, Harper took his own life, leaving behind a letter confessing to the murders of Edward Whitaker and Victor Lane. Case was closed, but Collins couldn't shake the feeling that justice had not been served. The third man's story was one of betrayal, revenge, and tragedy, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. And so, the fog lifted over London, but the shadow of the third man lingered, a ghostly presence in the heart of the city.